Okay, so I didn't actually hate Legend of the Sea Devils as much as everybody else seems to. That might just be because I saw it quite late, because I was actually in Rome at the time, and so I got to see everyone's reactions first, which obviously made me go in with quite low expectations because I didn't really see anybody saying it was good. And for me, the plot of this episode actually made more sense than I expected it to from what everyone was saying. However, that's not to say that I thought this episode was really good, and it definitely has a lot of problems that I'm gonna get into in this video. So right off the bat, we have another example of Chibnall having the Doctor use the Sonic for literally everything. Instead of figuring out what decade they're in and where they are by the taste of the air or something like that, she just scans the area with a Sonic. But what makes it more annoying in this episode is that she could have just figured that out from, you know, her earring being pulled, which happens in the episode, and from skimming the rocks, but instead she does that and then scans with a Sonic. We then meet Madam Ching, who I was looking forward to see what Chibnall would do with her in this, because he's normally pretty good at incorporating lesser known historical figures into his episodes. For example, with Rosa Parks in Rosa and Mary Seacole in War of the Sontarans. But in this episode, Madam Ching could have just been literally any pirate in history. Nothing in this episode really has anything to do with what happened to the real life Madam Ching. I mean, I'm not really an expert, I don't really know anything about her, but you can just tell they haven't really gone into exploring any other history at all in this episode. After meeting Madam Ching, we then meet the Sea Devils, who I still think look really good in this episode. Sometimes the effects they're using to like warp their face doesn't look that great. You can tell that it's like a 2D effect that they're doing, but for the most part I still think they look really good. Now when we meet this first Sea Devil, the Doctor, Yaz and Dan managed to trap it in a net, which was one of the most odd moments of this episode for me, because number one, why was the trap there in the first place? Secondly, how did the Doctor, Yaz and Dan know that the trap was there? And also, how did Yaz and Dan know what to do when the Doctor shouted no? They just got here, they hadn't had time to practice this trap, they didn't set up the trap themselves, and we hadn't even established that the trap was there. But what makes this even more annoying is the Sea Devil immediately escapes the trap, so they created this scenario which made no sense just for it to not even need to be there. Anyway, after this happens, Dan splits up with Yaz and the Doctor, and the Doctor really doesn't seem to care about his safety at this moment.
We're leaving without Dan. He wandered off, now we're wandering off too. Short hop, a few centuries.
Anyway, besides this point, Dan doesn't really contribute much to the story. I feel like it's almost like Chibnall didn't really know what to do with him in this episode. Now, the main problem I have with this episode, and the main problem a lot of people seem to have with this episode, is Chibnall still doesn't understand the Doctor's morals. And this is a problem that he has had with the Doctor throughout his whole era, if we're being honest. He seems to know what kind of things the Doctor would say, but doesn't really understand why the Doctor says them. One of the most egregious examples of this would have been in the Arachnids in the UK, where Chibnall knows the Doctor is against guns, but he clearly doesn't understand the reasoning why. But in this particular episode, he gets the Doctor's morals wrong in 3 separate ways. First of all, when the Doctor explains to Yaz that the Sea Devils think they have a claim to the planet, because obviously it's theirs too, they were actually here before us, Yaz replies with,
"That's not good."
Which not only is just an awful line, the Doctor doesn't disagree with Yaz or tell her that that's wrong. So it's almost like the Doctor is agreeing with Yaz on this point, which just isn't how the Doctor would feel. The Doctor knows the Sea Devils were here first and that it's their planet too. And what makes this even stranger is Chibnall wrote the Silurian two-parter back in series 5, which had a very similar dilemma, as the Silurians are basically Sea Devils that live underground instead of the ocean. And this issue really came to the forefront of this episode. So we know Chibnall understands that this is an important part of both the Silurians and the Sea Devils, but he almost just forgets about it in this episode. Another area where Chibnall gets the Doctor's morals completely wrong is when Ji-hun kills a Sea Devil, and she states,
"You didn't have to kill him."
But then later on in the episode, it's just completely fine with Sea Devils being killed. Once again, it's like Chibnall knows this is something the Doctor would say, but he doesn't understand why the Doctor would say this. Now, a lot of people have brought up the example of the Doctor killing the Rachnos to kind of show that this is the way the Doctor would act, but that scene, that moment where the 10th Doctor kills the Rachnos and the Rachnos' children, is meant to be an outlier. It's there to make a point. That scene is meant to show that this isn't something the Doctor would normally do. This is right after the Doctor loses Rose, and it's there to show that the Doctor needs someone to stop him from doing things like this. And that is the whole reason that scene happens in the first place. And the final way that Chibnall rights the Doctor's morals wrong in this episode is once again something that he's gotten wrong in the past. At the end of this episode, the Doctor is completely fine with Ji-hun sacrificing himself to destroy the Sea Devil's base. At first, she was going to do it herself, but as soon as he he offers, she doesn't try and stop him, and she almost praises him for doing so. This is very similar to the sacrifice that happened at the end of the Timeless Children with Koshamus, which just isn't something the Doctor would do. The Doctor would always much rather sacrifice themselves instead of somebody else doing it for them. There has been plenty of examples in the past of people sacrificing themselves for the Doctor, but it's not because the Doctor has let them do it. For example, at the end of Silence of the Library and Forest of the Dead, the Doctor is going to sacrifice himself to save everybody in the library, but River Song literally has to knock him out and handcuff him so that she can do it instead. And even when he's handcuffed, he's still trying to stop River from sacrificing herself. And another example I'd like to bring up to emphasize this is Davros's speech to the Doctor in Journey's End. And the Doctor's obviously looking really distraught in this scene, but he's not looking distraught just because of all these people that have sacrificed themselves for him. He's upset because he wasn't able to stop them, because he wasn't able to take their place. So this moment is extremely out of character for the Doctor. He's been writing the show for around 4 years now, and he still doesn't understand the Doctor's morals. Now, I can't really talk about this episode without bringing up Thasmin. I think the scene at the end of this episode between the Doctor and Yaz on the beach was a really good scene. I think it was well written, I think it was well performed, and I think it looked really nice. However, Thasmin has never stuck with me, because it seems like it was brought up in Eve of the Daleks, and that it's almost getting resolved in this episode. For me, at the moment, it seems like Chibnall's just kind of brought it up and then tried to get it out of the way as soon as possible, just because both Jodie and the fans have been wanting it. Some of the CGI wasn't great, but there were some very nice shots in this, like the TARDIS underwater. There was quite a bit of dodgy editing in this episode, and it does seem like the episode was longer and got quite heavily cut down. For example, I was very confused when the sea monster ate the TARDIS and then they just ended up in the Sea Devil's base. I wasn't sure if the base was inside the sea monster or how they got there if it wasn't, and I think that was due to some really dodgy editing and a lot of stuff being cut out of this episode. Now, obviously, we've got to look forward to the centenary coming up. I think it's very cool that Ace and Tegan are coming back, but it just seems like there's a lot happening in this next episode, and that does kind of lead me to not have much high hopes for this, because if Flux is an indicator of how well Chibnall can resolve so many storylines and so many things happening, I've not got such high hopes for this episode. But let me know what you think of Legend of the Sea Devils. Let me know if you're excited for the centenary, and if you want to see what I think is going to happen in the 60th anniversary or some ideas that could happen, I've got a video right here about that.